What's up guys, Asian here again with a theory crafting video concerning the Scalebreaker DLC. Specifically, we're taking a look at the Way of Martial Knowledge reworked set bonus and how that's going to compare to a very popular tanking set, support set, Alkosh. So with the advent of Scalebreaker, much like Zus has been doing with the previous patches, they've been updating and changing older sets, and so one of the sets that was touched was Way of Martial Knowledge. Now, this is the first iteration of the PTS, so the way that this set works might change in the future, but currently, the new Way of Martial Knowledge does seem to be a very strong support set for tanks to wear. Now, the question is, of course, is it going to be worth using Way of Martial Knowledge? What set would it end up replacing? Alkosh is a very powerful set. It's been widely regarded as the strongest support set, but Martial Knowledge might actually end up unseating it, or at the very least give it a run for its money, depending on, of course, various other things. So while we'll be comparing it to Alkosh, we'll also be taking a little bit further to see how it compares to Torag's Pact. So the idea behind it is Torag's Pact gives your Crusher enchant goes up from 2108 up to 2740, so basically you're gaining about 600 additional penetration. The question is it better off to get the additional penetration from something like piercing, or maybe running a sharpened weapon, double sharpened for stamina, for example, or do you forego the Torag's Pact and use Way of Martial Knowledge instead? In any case, this should be a pretty good, interesting thought experiment to kind of see just how good Way of Martial Knowledge actually operates. So the new Way of Martial Knowledge, while your stamina is below 75%, your light attacks cause the enemy to take 10% additional damage for 4 seconds. This effect can occur once every 6 seconds. So this basically means you have about a 66% uptime maximum of that additional 10% additional damage, and that, if it acts just like minor vulnerability, the wording is very similar, then there should be a damage taken debuff on the enemy, so it'll be multiplicative with things like minor vulnerability and major vulnerability, or I should say additive, but it'll be multiplicative with things like minor berserk, major berserk, and other sort of damage done modifiers. And so the set will only activate when your stamina is below 75%. It is a light armor set, and so the natural thing is, does it fall better on a healer? Does it fall better on a magicka DPS? Or does it fall better on a tank? Stamina below 75%, you might be able to do it on like a stamina or on a magicka healer, perhaps like a Templar healer if you're using Power of the Light, but it'll definitely be easier for a tank to be able to keep their stamina below 75% because that's their blocking resource. So as for magicka DPS, if you're able to run Rearming Trap, or I guess in this case Barbed Trap as of Scalebreaker, there is a potential that you'll be able to make use of this set, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you to maintain 100% uptime compared to like on a tank. So that's why we're going to be comparing this to Alkosh as well as Torag's Pact, just to kind of see how it compares to other tanking support sets in the game right now that are geared towards increasing overall damage done by the group. So that is the new Way of Martial Knowledge. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the actual mathematics. So I'm going to move myself over so you guys are able to actually see the mathematics. Boom, boom. Alright, so I already started a couple of calculations here. So remember that, generally speaking, the way you calculate out percentage difference is basically you take your initial and you subtract your, I should say, it's final minus initial divided by your initial value. So it'd be something like 100. If you want to see the difference between 90 and 100, for example, 100 being your final value, you do 100 minus 90 divided by the 90, and that will give you your percentage difference. So it's an 11.11% increase over 100 is an 11.1% increase to 90. So that's kind of how you do your general calculation here in terms of figuring out percentage difference. Now you'll see here that I have two calculations. One of them is going to be the kind of the optimistic scenario, and one of them is going to be the pessimistic scenario. It's basically what's the highest percentage that Alkosh will give, and then the other one is basically the lowest percentage that Alkosh can give. So again, the calculation is final minus initial over initial here. And so basically what we want to take a look at is your damage reduction. So if we take a look at our damage reduction, it'd be damage reduction with Alkosh active, that's your final, subtracted from without Alkosh active, that's your initial, and you divide it all by your initial value here. So this would kind of be the first value here. So if we go ahead and run this on the bottom here, we'll see that it ends up being about a 6.4% increase in overall DPS. That's basically the lowest that Alkosh is going to give you. So basically what this is, when you have basically all penetration active, so you're meeting that 1800 to 18,200, then you basically have 100% deal. You're dealing with 100% of the damage. But if you do not have Alkosh active, you still have at 3010 additional resistances on the boss, and so you'll end up doing this amount of damage instead. So you'll be doing 93.98% of your damage instead. So that's kind of where this value sort of lies here. And then optimistically, basically the most amount of damage that the Alkosh will give you is if you have no other debuffs, which is obviously not realistic, but just for the sake of comparison and just because for curiosity's sake, the max amount that Alkosh will give you is about a 9.5% increase in overall DPS. Now, next we have the Way of Martial Knowledge. So we only have one value here, but we're going to kind of take a look at different scenarios here. So this first one, again, you want to take your final and then you want to divide it by your initial. So we're going to be assuming that we have the maximum possible uptime on Way of Martial Knowledge. So that's a 66% uptime, so 0.66, multiplied by 10%, which would be 0.1. We're assuming that we're able to get 20% uptime on Major Vulnerability. I'm not 100% certain what the best skills are able to get out of the Major Vulnerability uptime, but that's what we're going to be going with, about 20% uptime or so. It's a little bit optimistic, but that's what we're going to be doing. 100% uptime on Minor Vulnerability, so that's where the 0.08% comes from. And so the top has our Way of Martial Knowledge, the bottom does not. And if we take a look at that, that gives us 5.84% increase in DPS. So it's going to be less than what Alkosh is able to give us. But let's say you don't have as many Stamina Necromancers. Let's say you're only really able to get, let's say, 10% uptime on Major Vulnerability instead of 20% uptime Major Vulnerability. If you take a look at that and shift the numbers around, it ends up being almost 6% DPS increase. If you just have Way of Martial Knowledge just by itself, then of course it'll just be your flat 6.6% increase because you don't have any of the damage modifiers. But at the very least, chances are you will have, at the very least, Minor Vulnerability, so that's another 0.08 added on. At least most groups will, so if you go ahead and do that, then it'll end up giving you a 6.1% increase in DPS. So, not going to be really worth it replacing Alkosh at the very least with Way of Martial Knowledge. But what about Torag's Pact? Would it be worth getting the penetration from Torag's Pact, about 700 or so additional penetration from things like piercing, or would it be better off running Way of Martial Knowledge? That one, the mathematics is going to be very similar. So it's basically the exact same thing that we have on Alkosh up here. The only difference is obviously we're going to be shifting the values around. So let me just put this here, just so I know what this all is if I decide to go back and look at it. So again, optimistically, we would have anywhere, let's see, 2740 minus 2108, which is about 632. So we'd have 632 remaining resistances here. So that would only give us about a 1.3% increase in DPS. That's basically the minimum amount that Torag's Pact would give you. And then obviously you have 2740 would be the additional. So actually, as we are assuming that we still have the infused crusher, it's just not affected by Torag's Pact. So if we go ahead and take a look at this, it's an 8.6% increase in DPS from Torag's Pact there. So actually no, we would still just subtract the 632 because we still want to compare it to, 532. We want 632 instead. So the infused Torag's Crusher enchant would give us a 8.6, but on top of the oh wait, hold on. No, it should be 21.8, and then this one should be 27.40. So the maximum to give would be, I did something strange. Oh, I see what I did wrong here. Another there. That'd be about a 1.8% increase at maximum. So you're taking a look at and we're between 1.2 and 1.8% increase in DPS compared to Way of Martial Knowledge, which would give us at minimum around maybe like a 5.8% increase in DPS. So it might be worth running Way of Martial Knowledge instead of Torix Pact, assuming that you're able to make up the additional 632 additional penetration through probably things like piercing or spell erosion CPs. So it does seem like Way of Martial Knowledge might make its way onto support roles. Again, it remains to be seen, because if you think about it, you have basically 8 slots for different sets, and there are some sets that you definitely want to have there. So things like Alclash, things like Ebon if you're a progression style guild, obviously Olarime. So, and obviously the best place for this would be the tanks. Now you could again put it on a healer, you could put it on a magicka DPS. So you might be able to, it might be able to squeeze its way in on some other DPS, basically a non-tank. But that still remains to be seen, and it also is assuming that Way of Martial Knowledge remains this way. And when it's released in about 5 weeks or so. So generally speaking, it does seem like Way of Martial Knowledge, if you're a support role, I would recommend taking a look at trying to get this set. It is a fairly cheap set to get. It does come from Craglorn, so you're able to farm it yourself, even if you just have the basic game. And it's been out for quite a while now. So this is ESO's, I think, 4th anniversary. So it's been out now for probably around 3-ish years or so. So definitely a lot of Way of Martial Knowledge stuff, especially because people are, grinding through Skyreach in order to get up the way up to max CP. So there's a lot of pieces of Way of Martial Knowledge out there, so it should be pretty cheap to pick up. So if you are a tank main, I would recommend taking a look at this. Healer mains, definitely. Magicka DPS, I hold off on it for now until we get a better idea of where this what role will end up wearing Way of Martial Knowledge, if it ends up kind of being a set that we want to have on PvE raids. So that's going to be it for this video. Hope you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions about Way of Martial Knowledge or anything at all concerning the mathematics behind this, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to get back to them as best I can. Again, hope you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.